Okay, welcome to the halftime review. It's our pleasure to be joined by Mark Sampson, former England women's manager and current Stevenage FC assistant manager. We'll be discussing the topic of individual player development. Throughout the presentation Mark presents, we'll have the chat box on the right-hand side there if you want to put any questions in. And also thanks for those that have dropped us some questions in advance of today. So we hope you enjoy, and Mark, many thanks for joining us.
Pleasure. Thanks, gents. Pleasure to be here. And evening, everyone. I hope everyone's keeping safe and well. And I'll say the same thing that I'm sure a lot of you will probably be thinking, is that if a 3-year-old little girl runs in the room at any point, I apologise in advance. I've told Mum to look after her for an hour, but if she does, hopefully she'll know a lot more about this topic than me. But no, thank you for the invitation. And I want to talk about individual development. I'm sure a lot of us are coaches and team coaches, but throughout my career, I've been fascinated by the topic of individual development. Why do certain players go on to max out their potential, and why don't others? You know, right from the outset of my coaching career, nearly 20 years ago now, I've had the privilege of seeing players go from where they were to reach the highest levels of the game. And I've seen players who at the outset, I was adamant they would reach the top levels of the game, but for whatever reason haven't. So where that fascination comes, and an example here is 2 players really, and some of you might know, some of you might not, but Theo Walcott and Gareth Bale actually made their debut for Southampton the same season back in 2006. And Theo has had a good career. You know, his curve of development has gone up and down. It hasn't been a straight line like that, but you know, he's got better, he's developed, and he's got to the point where now he's playing in the Premier League. He's won 50 caps for England, an exceptional career. But at that point in time in 2006, there wasn't many people who were saying that Gareth Bale was a better player or had more potential than Theo Walcott. Hence the reason why Gareth went for 3 or 4 million and Theo went for nearly 15 million quid to Arsenal. So when I look at Gareth's career and I think, well, why was his rate of development like that? Why was his curve so much steeper than any other players of that generation? And I've always been fascinated really by what is in that gap. What is happening there in those 2 chunks that is making a difference on a day-to-day basis? And from my experience of managing teams, I've always felt this principle is important as well. If I go back to my time with England, the white curve was Germany. That they were ahead of us at the start, and we had to understand that they're not going to get worse, they're going to get better. So how can our rate of development be significantly quicker than theirs, so at some point we can overtake and then stay ahead? And probably to summarize the slide, the whole presentation really in one image, and it's quite a topical image at the moment because it feels like every organization is using this at the moment, and I think at the moment we're round about that 1R rating. But in my experience working with the elite players is the players who've gone on to achieve and max out. And when I say achieve, I mean max out, not because they went on to achieve great things. I've worked with players who have made the absolute maximum of their ability and talent. And why I use that diagram is that in my experience, there's players who can stay in the extra hot and the hot level on a consistent daily basis. What behaviors and attitudes are in that extra hot and hot period that make sure they're there every single day? And I'd like to share a video with you of I think what sums this up.
Recent success to one specific kind of strategy.
No.
It's given people confidence. I'm very much a strength-based coach, so I think when I work with teams, I like to look at players and see what they're good at and try and develop that even more, and giving them a belief that you can achieve, because I think that there's so much talent in people, and if you can help them and develop that talent, and that's all I've ever tried to do with any player that I've worked with. You know, I enjoy the development side. I enjoy seeing people become better and improve. And if you can pull it all together into a team format, then hopefully you can have success. So of course, you need to have a philosophy. You need to have a clear identity of how you want to work, and then you look to hook players and people emotionally in order to help them dream and achieve what it is they want to achieve.
And I think that was a video of Brendan speaking recently at Oxford University. And a quote underneath was from Luis Suarez. I think just after he'd left Liverpool and scored his first goal for Barcelona in the Champions League. And it for me, it epitomises what the top modern day coaches are displaying to us. You know, your Rodgers, your Guardiolas, your Klopps, your Brailsfords, your Maresmos. What they're showing us is that actually recruitment's important, retention's important, but fundamentally player development is critical. How we improve the players we work with will define how good a team we become, how good our players become, and obviously as a result of that, where we get to in our coaching pathway. And I think summing up what is the difference of players and environments that I've been part of, and I've been privileged to go and spend time in and see, between an environment that players can max out and players that can't, is that word responsibility. In the environments I've seen and experienced, both as a coach and as a player and observed, these are the type of things that I would be seeing where the environment doesn't create athletes and people who can become responsible for their own career, who can take accountability for the direction they want to go in on a daily basis. And just to take a couple, is that you often see that there's huge feel of pressure in that environment. You walk through a door, you can smell it. There's a very critical nature to it. It's not my fault, it's you. Ego gets in the way a lot. You know, actually, I want to be the one that gets the credit here, so I don't want to accept any criticism. And ultimately then, there's a fear of failure. And I think as a coach, once you can get to the point where you can start to take your foot off the control accelerator and start to ease control towards the players, create an environment that is more player-led, create an environment where players are more willing to take responsibility, suddenly you start to see a different type of environment and different qualities that you're smelling and seeing in the environment you're working in. You're seeing a huge sense of value. You know, people value what you're giving them. You value the players. Everyone's got a feeling of value that they're part of something special. They're part of a football club, of an organisation. There's a feeling of support, not from just coach to player, but from player to coach, from player to player, from player to physio. There's a real sense of we're focused on what we're good at here. We're going to really emphasise strengths. And ultimately, it's that coach and the leader having the ability and confidence to show vulnerability, to create an environment of psychological safety. And one great example, and I was privileged to spend some time with his coaches in his environment for a couple of days a few years ago, is Andy Murray. And this is an article from 2007, when Andy Murray was ranked 11th in the world. And 2 years later, as we all know, Andy Murray became Olympic champion, Wimbledon champion, and world number one. So I was fascinated about what happened in that 2-year period. He'd been a pro for a long time. He'd been trying to crack it. He couldn't quite get into that top 10 consistently, nowhere near number one. So what happened in that 2-year period? And from what I've read and from what I could gather, this was the moment when Andy Murray decided to take responsibility and accountability for his own career and drive it towards becoming number one. And then to get into the detail really about how I think that happens. And again, you know, I'm probably not telling anyone nothing they don't know here. And I'm just going to talk about my experiences and things I've seen and felt. And the first reason for me is why. Why are we doing this? And we've all probably done a lot of quizzes over Zoom and with our families and friends at the moment. So one challenge I'll pose everyone is what links those images. I'm hoping a lot of people, instead of shouting out, will say Rocky Balboa. One of my, still to this day, my favourite set of films, and actually my favourite films. And one of the reasons is that as a coach, the more I look back on those movies, the more I realise how much learning's there about elite development of people. And why is that the case? Because in all the Rocky movies, whether his coach was Mick at the start in Rocky 1 and Rocky 2, whether it was his best mate, his brother-in-law, Paulie, his opponent in Rocky 1 and Rocky 2, Apollo Creed, his son, his wife, the ability, the connection he had with all of them allowed them to have a big influence on his career. Because he created such a strong connection with those people, his ears became very open to what they had to say. And I think this is critical at the first point. I think I've seen so many coaches, and I've been guilty in the past, of diving into an environment, can't wait to assert my authority on it, share my information, show how much I know. But actually that ability to create that psychological safety, that feeling where people can be themselves without the fear of being shot down for it, knowing that if they make a mistake, they're going to get support. That vulnerability, and starting to create that trust. And that old school saying of no one cares what you know if they know how much you care, I'm a big believer in. I feel that's the first step of creating some form of relationship with players and athletes, of people, before we can get to the point where we can work together. Next is about that co-creating, is that what Rocky did well, his coaches did well, is that, yes, they guided him, but ultimately he's the guy who's going to go in the ring and has got punches coming at him left, right and centre, knowing that he's only one punch ever away from being knocked out, and no one wants to get knocked out. So his coaches, the people he worked with closely, his team around him, understood that he needs to buy into what he's doing. He's got a very good view of what he needs. And I go back to Rocky 1 when they're working out their game plan, and his coach wants him to fight as a southpaw, where actually he's a right-handed fighter. And in the end, he decides, no, it's not for me. That ability to co-create and work together on a plan, I think is so important from the outset to get that buy-in. And the challenge for a coach in there is, how can I ask great questions? How can I probe? How can I ask enough open questions to get really the nitty-gritty about what we can do together and where this person's at? And then finally, and probably one of the most important things throughout the presentation, I hope, will be what Rocky had in all these movies and what the movies demonstrated to us, and I felt was the moral of the story, is how important a vision is. You know, how important is that vision right at the top, that motivation that is going to get you up every day to do the things that 99.99% of the population aren't willing to do. And I go back to it in Rocky 2, he couldn't get motivated. And for those who don't know the movies, in Rocky 1, he was an outsider. He got a lucky dip shot. He won the lottery to fight the world heavyweight champion of the world, Apollo Creed. And he got a draw. And as a result of that, he became famous, got a bit of money. And in Rocky 2, when the champion wanted a rematch, he signed up to it. But ultimately, he had no motivation, because in Rocky 1, his vision was to prove people wrong, was to tell people, I'm not a no-hoper. I can win this. I want to prove I'm something. But once he'd proven that, in Rocky 2, he had no motivation. He wasn't training. He wasn't working. And then at the birth of his son, suddenly then, a new vision. You know, actually, I've got someone now I've got to care for. And the vision is now, I want to make this boy proud. I want to make my wife proud. He started training. And for those of you who haven't seen the film, I won't spoil the result by saying what happened at the end of the fight. But I think ultimately that the people I've worked with and the people I've seen who've gone and maxed out are the ones who've got a real clear vision, that every single day know why they're doing it. And I think as a football coach, what I've tried to do every single day is ask at least a few players in the team who you're playing for and why you play football. And I think there are two questions that often as coaches we get so absorbed in the X's and O's, we forget to ask ourselves, and ultimately we forget to ask our players. Probably getting stuck into the nitty-gritty then of the detail is that I think once we've created that connection, once we've started to understand this is a two-way process, and ultimately it's player-led. You know, you're the one guiding me. I'm hoping that you're going to do what you need to do, max yourself out, and my job is when you get to that point, you tap me on the shoulder and ask, I've got as far as I can, I need a bit of support. And I can either give you that support or point in the direction of the person who I think can give you that support. So in terms of getting into detail, I think this is critical, is right, we've created a connection. We've agreed where we are. We've got a real clear vision. We're excited now about what we want to do and how we want to get there. And now we've got to work out that roadmap. You know, if we're here now and we're working back from, let's imagine, being the best player in the world, winning the Ballon d'Or, which Mr. Ronaldo decided back in 2005 that's what he wanted to do. How are we going to get there? What's the gap? What are the steps we've got to take? And that process starts for me with a real clear assessment. You know, looking at what are you doing now that works, comparing yourselves to other players, identifying niches in the market. You know, what can I do that others can't? And what opportunities are out there that I can grab straight away? They're going to be some quick wins to work me towards that vision. And I think critically then is that players need to understand that we can't be good at everything, whether that's in life or in football. And, you know, knowing our identity and our USP, you know, what makes us different? What is our unique selling point? What makes us stand out is ultimately at the crux of it. In my experience, again, is that there's lots of players who we can hide weaknesses, but if we can really maximise their strengths and max out on 2 or 3 areas of what makes a difference to them, create that identity, that's normally what makes the difference between where they are and getting to where they want to be. I always tell the example of Paul Scholes, is that if you thought about what Paul Scholes couldn't do, we could have a long conversation. He wasn't that mobile. He wasn't known for getting about the pitch. Definitely couldn't tackle because he loved the yellow card and a red card. You wouldn't say he's great in the air, although he did score a few headed goals. But actually, what was he good at? Well, wow, he could pick a pass. And wow, he had an unbelievable ability to understand what was going on a football pitch. And just by being world class at those two and hiding some of his other weaknesses, it allowed him, in my opinion, to get to the level he got.
Mark, just jumping in there, what level do you think we should then be, you know, taking our players and making them work on those strengths rather than, you know, some areas they might lack in their game to turn them into super strengths?
Yeah, great question. For me, right from the outset, I think for example, is that in terms of bringing some enjoyment to the activity, you know, I speak for myself, and psychologists tell us that we all prefer doing things we enjoy. Yeah. So actually working on the things that we're good at gives us a sense of fulfillment, a sense of enjoyment, builds that love of the game. And I think the barriers, the blockers to that identity being created, or the weaknesses, however you want to call it, whatever terminology you want to use, are the things that we can find a way to integrate within that program. So we are focusing on our perception of the game, looking over our shoulders, but at the same time, we might be firing passes to a player's left foot. So as a result, they are working on their left foot, which is a weakness, which is a blocker to them getting where they want to get. But our focus is on, well, let's keep building that perception. And hopefully we'll come to the point as well, we talk about how important language is in this process.
Brilliant.
And I think it probably leads on then to that point of team context, how important it is to understand the context of the team, depending on what type of player you are. And I think Fernando Torres is such a good example of this, is that at Liverpool, he was firmly recognised as one of the best centre forwards in the world, scoring goals on a consistent basis. And then if you said to Paddy Power, what odds are you going to give me that Fernando Torres, after his £50 million move to Chelsea, is going to score 3 goals in 6 months, having not been injured? You know, they'd offer you 1,000,000 to 1.
Yeah.
And the fact that he did has always fascinated me about why. And I think if we look at football, because we are individuals, that team context is so important. At Liverpool, Fernando Torres was given the opportunity to really bring out and show the best of his identity. He was a number 9. He liked to play on the shoulder. He wanted to run in behind. You know, Benitez at the time, Liverpool were a counter-attacking team, so there was space for him to run in behind. Steven Gerrard was playing in behind him. I think I would get a few goals with Gerrard playing in behind me. Alonso played in midfield. You know, there was so much of that team that allowed Torres to show his identity. And then we look at Chelsea. You know, they were more dominant. They played a lot more in the opposition's half, so there's naturally less space in behind. They were very much more cross-focused. They used their wingers, Robin, Duff, Cole at the time, and Didier Drogba was there. You know, he was the main man, and it was play off rather than through. So as a result, he wasn't allowed to bring his identity into that team. So I think understanding not only how can we bring our identity onto this team as a player, but also for a coach. How can I set this team up to get the best out of my players and maximise their strengths and hide their weaknesses? And what we'll probably get to, I hope, in more detail, it's an example of what we would call a goal tree. So something I use with players now, at the club I work with, or with the company I work with, and something I've used over the course of my career, particularly the last 3 or 4 years, is that ultimately at the top, and I'll try and go through step by step, is that vision. Is why am I doing this? You know, I need to remind you every day about why I do this. And personally speaking, if that was me, my vision is I want to make my family proud. However that looks, I want to make them proud. I want to give them a great life. And if I ever get to the point where I'm thinking, do I really want to do this today? That is when that vision kicks in and reminds me, yes, do you know what? If I want to do those things, if I want that vision to come to reality, this is something I've got to go through today. And underneath that would be the goal for the season. I tend to work in 3-month periods, for a 12-month block, for Olympic cycle, whatever it might be. And for a player, that might be, I want to enter the top scorer division this year. I want a young player. I want to establish myself in the first team this season. And then we get to the crux of it. You know, what is the identity? What's the USP? What are the skills that you're going to bring to us that are going to make that happen? And then really you've got game, technical, tactical, engine, physical, mindset, psychological, and then the team being the social. And I would always try and set 3 real clear goals within each of those areas in which we can focus on. And then underneath that, the time. We've got 3 months. So we've got July, August, September. What 3 of these 12 are we going to focus on in July? And then week by week, day by day, so on and so forth. Because I'll talk back again about it, but it's all well and good having a long-term motivation. But the danger of only having a long-term motivation is that it can feel a long way away. It can feel like I'm never going to get there. If Cristiano Ronaldo said as a young lad, I want to win the Ballon d'Or, there must have been days where he woke up and thought, I'm so far away from that. I've just had a setback. How am I ever going to get there? And that's why these process goals are so important. You know, you need the long-term vision for the motivation, but you need the process day to day, week to week goals to know that there's a path to get there. And what we then try and do is I'll work with the player and we'll say, actually, when we achieve something, we'll tick it off. And I'll talk about why that's so important as we go on. And if we haven't, it won't be a cross, we haven't done it. We'll always use an L. Well, okay, we haven't quite got there this month or this week, but we've learned a lot. We're much closer to getting there. So let's move it to next month and let's work out what can we learn from what we haven't got right this month that we can tweak next month, and that becomes a thumbs up, not an L. And I'll go into more detail about something I've used with players in the past. Talking about when, I think this is so important in a football context. And this is something I picked up really from spending a lot of time in other sports, rugby, athletics, tennis, lucky enough to spend some time in some big companies. And what you realize in football is actually the amount of time we spend in formal training is so low. So if you work out the 24 hours a day, times 7 is X, times 4 is X, times 12 is how much time we've got in a year. If as players, we're only using the time we're on the field training, playing matches, or when I say off-field training, I mean in the classroom, in the canteen, meeting with a coach, we are missing out on the majority of learning opportunity. And I think as a coach, understanding how important not just formal learning opportunities are, but informal touch points are critical. I know from experience, the best coaching I've done has been in a corridor, has been over a phone call, has been over lunch, over a cup of coffee at breakfast. At the end of training, when everyone else has gone and you catch a player on their way out and you think, I'm jumping a car by 5 o'clock today, and suddenly you're around the corner at Starbucks, you're there at 7:30. Understanding and actually plotting out as a coach And it sounds a bit structured, but I think it's so important. When am I going to get these informal touch points in is so important. And then again, going back to those, not just that long-term vision, but how do I keep people motivated on a day-to-day basis? And I call it focuses. I would always, for example, when we were with England, I still do it at Stevenage now, is that I'd always say to the players before we start training, right, what's your focus today? What are you going to get out of this session? Because my job as a coach is to coach the team. This is what I want the team to get. And I've got some idea of individual focuses, and all my staff have. But what have you turned up today to be better at? Because you can't rely on my session. And I think if you can get to the point as a coach, where I was lucky enough to get with England in particular, was the players are knocking on your door the day before. What are we doing in training tomorrow, coach? What I want to know, I want to work out. If we're doing that, what can I get out of it? And we'd even have players who would literally write 3 things down in their hands. So one of my centre forward, what are you focused on today? And it put the hand up. I want to get my shots so early. I want to make sure my work ethic is good. I want to be a nightmare to defenders. Brilliant. And then you get to the point then when you can have some conversations about it, and you can observe that in training. And the whole process again is not just co-created, but we're sharing this learning experience. And then the bottom one is probably one of the most important I felt was used in my experience, particularly as an international manager, is that an international manager, you need to deliver in tournament time. So you get 2 years of nothing and then a month of everything's on the line. And what I learned was so important was that there is a time to develop confidence, but there's also a time to develop competence. And by that I mean is that as a coach, I think you're always focused on developing competence. I want to make you better. I want to teach you how to be a better striker. Whereas actually there's times where you need to park that and understand on the player's path on their journey, you know, now's a time where I actually need to build confidence. And a lot of the young players I work with now who are just progressed from under 23s, scrapping to try and get in the first team, I'm finding that actually I'm spending 90% of my time building their confidence, working on their confidence, not so much on the competence. And I think that's such a critical part of this process, understanding as a coach, what does the person I'm working with need at this given time?
Just on that, Mark, is there like particular skill sets that like jump out that you feel have benefited you that you've used and applied on a one-to-one basis to drive that confidence?
Yeah, good question. I think there's lots of, I mean, ultimately being strength focused definitely helps. And I think reminding players of what they're good at is important. I'll talk about evidence now in a minute about how important it is to show people evidence of actually that they might not feel they're on the right path, but if we look hard enough and if we switch our mindset from looking at what's going wrong to what's going right, what an impact that can have on confidence. I think often if I look at, and I'm speaking about 10 years ago now, on my A license, the only time I was told to interrupt the session was when there was a fault. Stop, stand still. This is what you did wrong. This is what I want you to do. And naturally that is going to reinforce negative behaviors. I'm actually, if you think about it, I'm telling the whole team, hold on a minute, Mark Sampson's just done something wrong here, just to let you all know. So I'm not actually doing much for Mark Sampson's confidence. So I think there's various strategies you can use, but ultimately I think awareness will give you a great platform to do that. If I can be thinking all the time, what does this player at this given time need? You know, what's happening in their life, what's happening in their career that's going to dictate how I work with them today. You know, if I've got 23 players turn up on the training pitch and suddenly this player looks a bit down, doesn't look very motivated, you know, my mind's going to what's happened. You know, is something happened at home? Has something happened in the changing room? You know, how can I dig into that? How can I use my relationship with that player to understand what they need today to be the best version of themselves in that session? And then hopefully that links in then to the how really. And I think it's important. I know as a coach, I've had to work very hard on becoming a good learner. And one of the most important things I think I did with my time with England was employ a group of people to work with us who were learning and people experts, who were integrating the camp day to day, and their sole focus was help my players become better learners, help me become a better learner as a better teacher. And I think as a coach, we've got to remember that a lot of our players don't really understand yet how to learn. A lot of their experiences of learning have been in the classroom in school. And speaking personally, I didn't find that a very good learning experience. And there's a lot of young people who, for whatever reason, don't connect with that way of working. So I think not only developing a belief, not only developing a learning mindset, but actually teaching them techniques on how to be a good learner is critical. And in my experience, good learning is fun. Good learning is improved when it's shared. So, for example, I challenge our players a lot that, right, you're my centre forward, you're working on this. Today in training, I want you to go up against that centre half. And at the end of training and during training, I want you to tell him what he's doing that's making your life a nightmare and what he's doing that's making your life easy. And I want you as a centre half, tell my centre forward, what runs does he make that gives you a nightmare? And at the end of training, I want you to sit by him in lunch and I want you to, and ultimately then you get to the point where this learning experience is being shared and it's becoming social. And like when you go to the gym, I find it incredibly hard to go to the gym on my own. But every morning, our group of staff at Stevenage, I hope most of the time go, but the main reason I go is I don't want to let them down. That shared experience is me feeling, if I don't go today, I'm letting people down. I want to go today. I want to be part of that environment. And I think creating environments which are fun, enjoyable, where learning can be shared, experiences can be shared, and learning becomes a social experience. I go back to that circle where how much of our time is spent away from the training pitch. Well, if we can make learning a social experience, we're going to start eating away at that circle and that pie and get a few more pieces, becoming a learning situation. And ultimately, learning's got to be memorable. How are we creating examples and information that our players are going to remember and relate to? And one of the most effective techniques I found at doing that, and there are so many effective techniques, but one thing that works for me is I found I enjoyed telling stories. So one of my key roles with the England team wasn't to deliver on the training pitch, because I had coaches who were brilliant at that. They were much better than me, but I knew I could tell a good story. And I think using stories as a way to get information across can often help players remember things well. And I've used the example of the hare and the tortoise. And I was told that story as a young boy when I was, 3-4 years old. I tell it to my daughter now, who's 3. And I still know the moral of that story. Slow and steady wins the race. Don't get arrogant. Don't get cocky. Make sure that you've got the character and strength and resilience to keep going, however far you are behind. And I know there's no way I'd remember that message if I didn't remember that story. And I think, how can we find ways to make the training week, the training session, different and memorable? What theme have I got this week that can get me through the week, that can get my players excited again? We coach for probably 40 weeks a year, and we're on the same training pitch. We're using the same equipment. We're eating the same food. We're with the same people. Finding ways to make that environment fun, social, shared, and memorable and exciting is a huge challenge, but a hugely rewarding experience if you can get it right. And in my experience, hugely beneficial to creating independent learners. And then probably the last bit of information I'll go into is what if? So what if it doesn't work, and what if it's not going well during the plan? And I think I go back to it, and you guys asked the question about confidence, is that ultimately managing belief is critical. How can I make sure that the people I'm working with have constant belief in themselves that they can be the best version of themselves every single day? And I often tell a story, and it's not my story, I've stolen it from someone, about Father Christmas. And relevant now with a 3-year-old as a father is that as a young person, you believe wholeheartedly in Father Christmas. And when you believe in something, you tend to look for evidence that supports that belief. So my young daughter at the moment, every Christmas morning wakes up there's presents under the tree. Ho-hos be. Wow, there's a red light over there. That must be reindeer's nose. Everything she sees supports, is evidence to suggest what she believes is true. Now, at some point, that magic dust disappears. And I hope that isn't for a long, long time. But when you go to school and you start speaking to other children and someone says, Father Christmas is not real. Father Christmas, I saw my mother and my father putting presents under the tree. Suddenly that evidence starts to etch away at that belief. And I think our job to maintain belief and push belief is to make sure we're providing supporting evidence that tells them they're on the right path. And I go back to the gold tree, which we use with the ticks and the thumbs up. And as silly as it sounds, but actually what I found with using that model is that suddenly a lot of green starts to appear. So at the start of a month, there's 0. But at the end of 3 months, well, I can't be that bad because I've got 23 green thumbs up here. And I've only got a 4 couple of L's. And actually, I've turned those 4 L's into green ticks. So managing belief, I think, is critical. Managing change, moving club, different experience outside. I think, how do you support that? And we've gone through a lot of that about understanding the person you're working with, having that connection where you know where something's not quite right. A new manager, so the team context has changed, how we've got to tweak our game to make sure we can show identity still. And ultimately, if we want to move along the responsibility, accountability chart, we have to manage it as a coach. If at the start we assume that we're right on the left-hand side of that scale, where it's very much coach-led, and we want to move across it to get to the point where it's player-led, we've got to manage that process. If I'm doing the same things on day 1 as I am on day 101, then the accountability won't have improved much. At some point, I've got to hand over. And I think there's different ways you can do that. I think at the start, you're saying, for example, right, here are some clips I've got. Go away, have a look at them. Whereas you want to get to the point, and a lot of the players I work with now, on a Monday morning, will send me the clips they want me to look at. Will send me clips of top players they've seen doing the things they think they can learn from. And I call that managing accountability. The next step for me now is, right, well, how can I get them to interpret those clips better? But I think as a coach, if we want our players to be accountable, like we manage them to play well and behave well, we've got to manage their accountability and move across that spectrum. Yes, sometimes you go backwards to go forwards, but we're responsible for managing it.
Just a couple questions related to the last part. First one is, has there been a time where you've yourself has kind of doubted your philosophy around coaching and doing this type of thing, and how have you managed that?
In terms of my own mindset?
Yeah, in terms of your philosophy.
I think always as a coach, you're always, the nature of the business is that we get lots of kicks in the teeth on a regular basis. Unless you're Jurgen Klopp at the moment and winning 90% of your games, normally every other week you're suffering a setback and defeat. And I think a bit like as a player, I think as a coach, my belief is that you want to try and work out what your identity is, what you feel your strengths are, and get better at that process. And I think I'm a big believer that ultimately making the players better makes the team better. And my biggest experience of that was when we lost the World Cup semi-final in 2015 with the England team. Your first thought as a coach is, how are we going to win the next one? And as an international team, you can't sign any players. So from the period of 2015 to 2017, and the team went on a significant journey, it was a far better team at that point, even though they didn't quite get over the line in 2017. 9 of the starting 11 was the same. 19 of the 23 who travelled the tournament were the same. So how are they a better team? And for me, it was through the individuals were better. The environment was better. And I go back to, Mauricio Pochettino is a manager I've got a lot of admiration for. And the reason is that his Spurs team in his first full season in 2015, 12 were involved in the Champions League final in 2019. Now, Dele Alli in 2015 was a £5 million player. Dele Alli in 2019 was a £50 million player. What's happened with Dele to get from there to there? And Mauricio was in the same boat as I was. Daniel Levy told him, you got no money, young man. You can't go and sign a finished article. So you make these players, Alderweireld, Vertonghen's, Rose, Davis, Vorms, Lloris, Kane, Ericsson, you make them the player they need to be. So, of course, I think you have doubts every day, but ultimately I'm a big believer in that developing players is a key tool for any coach to be successful.
Brilliant. And then there's another one that's related to the goal tree. And it's, have you ever been in the situation, where a player's had a lot of L's compared to the amount of ticks, and how do you manage that?
Yeah, good question. And I think it comes back on that side of it then to managing the change process. So we might set a goal in the first. None of the players I work with this year, for example, at Stevenage, decide they want to get relegated this season. So we might have to adapt those goals as we go. Our vision is the same. Some of the players I work with now at club level have determined that they want to play in the Premier League. So that vision is still there. They still want to make their families proud. They still want to prove people wrong who've doubted them. But we've had to tweak the goals as we go. Thinking that we could get 15 goals this year and 10 assists has adjusted. And that's not a bad thing as long as we're giving some reasoning and we're still linking it to that vision. And I think probably then touching on an example. So this is an example of a player I'm working with at the moment, who's not at our club, but a player working independently, who's, to use Fernando Torres' example, is a Fernando Torres type striker. He's a number 9. So this is the identity part, I would call, of the goal tree, really, of understanding what is your identity. And this player's ultimately, their identity is they are running in behind striker. They're a Fernando Torres, they're a Jamie Vardy, they're an Mbappe, they're a Jody Taylor, they're an Alex Morgan. They're that type of forward that you might not see very often in the game, but at any point they could just get on the end of a pass and finish it. And creating identity, I think, starts ultimately with working out what the identity is. So for this player example, it's, well, you are running behind. And then all the bits at the bottom really is all the process we've got to go through. And it's just a taste there of all the things we've got to think about to be the best we can at running in behind. So for example, what's happening on the ball? Where's the space? Where are our opponents? Where are our teammates? What's my teammate's body shape telling about where he can play? Is there a passing lane available to me? Do I have to create one? Is there some separation from a defender? Or have I got to set a defender up by coming short to go long? All these things have got to be thrashed around. But at some point, we've got to make the complex simple and have some clear messaging towards the player that, right, we get all that, we understand all that, and we're going to link into that the physical side. So if I want to be good at running behind physically, what are the key things I've got to do to help me be better at that? What's my mindset got to be? And how am I going to be as a team player? Because if I'm Jamie Vardy, I'm a better version of Jamie Vardy if Riyad Mahrez is playing for me. And I'm going to demand of Riyad Mahrez, when you get your head up and you cut inside, you put me in. I'm going to demand of Azaki, when you get the football and you get faced up, put me in. So I think understanding all that, but our job is to narrow it down. Make the complex very simple. So with the player I work at the moment, we narrowed it down to 3 key phrases. We're going to anticipate. Before the ball even gets the person who could consider passing you the ball, we're going to have that perception of what could happen next. What's the best thing that can happen here for me as a player? Could he face up? Yes. Brilliant. Am I on the offside line? Can I see the ball and goal? Am I in between or outside defenders? Am I showing some sort of communication to that player, be it verbal or non-verbal in my body shape? Can they not face up? So might they need me to come short to be a link pass? And then the next pass, I'm going to run in behind. And again, going back to using storytelling, images, visuals, we summarize that through a question of sport. So I'm not even sure if they still do this, but I spent some time with this player showing them old school question of sports about what happens next. So that's the round where they show an innocuous event. So it might be a snooker table and Jimmy White is just about to hit a shot and they press pause. And you've got to think, what is the most weird thing that could come next? And we watched a lot of those videos. We had a bit of banter about it. We did a few of the ones in her game where she fell over, and in his game where he did this and that. Again, we share that learning. And now we always talk about what's the best thing that can happen. So our team are defending deep. We're thinking, if we win the ball back, what's the best thing that can happen? What could happen next? And we'll often throw that image out and talk about in our clips, pause, question of sport. And we'll talk about what did happen, what could happen. I think the next most important thing we identified was their starting position. So if we're going to win a race in behind, if Virgil van Dijk starts there and the goal is here, and you start there, it's going to be tough to not just catch him up but overtake him. So we need to be on the offside line. By the time that person's ready to play, we've got to make that fair race. So we talked about the tee position. So in golf, and the lad's a golfer, I said, why would you tee off from behind a white box? You know, if I'm a good golfer, I put my tee bang in between those two white sticks. I don't tee off in the rough. I don't tee off 25 yards behind it. I tee off as close to the place I want to get as I possibly can. So he knows when we talk about the tee position, he's got to be in that tee position, on the outside shoulder, in between defenders, right on the offside line. At the moment, that person could play and maintain that position throughout the move. And then the basics of, you need to see the ball and the goal. Because again, if we're having a race, if we're racing that way and someone's facing that way to start and I'm facing the opposite way and got to turn around, it gives them a better chance to win the race. I want to make sure I can see the ball and the goal and I can get in my stride straight away. And then finally, we talked about the finish. You know, ultimately, this person I'm working with, the player I'm working with, was at his best, and she was at her best when she was calm and collected. When she wasn't nervous, she could show composure and coolness and calm. And when you got in that moment, you could relax. You're in control of the situation. Where's the goalkeeper? 80% of goals are scored in the bottom right or left corners. So if we're not sure, let's play percentages. Your time, hit it as early as you can, but as late as needed. All these things summed up by finish coolly. And when I show the player these images, I'm hopeful is all that information is there, but it's being summarized in those points. And I'm going to show an example of what happens next. So this is the type of clip we watch, where hopefully you can see the image. Ball works through, Atletico Madrid are playing Valencia, and we talk about in this moment now, what happens next? So you're the number 9, you want to run in behind. What's the best thing that can happen for you? And where can you position yourself to make the most of that move? And if you watch it in the end, it is a bit of a question of sport. At the point they release that pass, there, no one's assuming that ball is getting slipped through that gap, bar one person on the field who's anticipated, who's adjusted their body position, and is about to finish calmly. And then we talked about the anticipation. Bang, already, before the ball has got to the player, what's the best thing that could happen next? Well, definitely this person could play the ball in behind. So get on the tee position, on the offside line, on the shoulder, outside or in between defenders. You'll see now Mbappe adjust so he can make sure he can see the ball and he can see the goal. And with that racing start, there's no way he's catching it with his pace. And we would reflect on their clips when they did it well, when they didn't do it well. Top players doing it again. And what you'll find a lot, sorry about the quality of the image, is that actually the top players tend to do a lot of things consistently. So in this season at Monaco, Mbappe scored over 1/3 of his goals from this type of situation. Now, that season he got his move to Paris Saint-Germain. If you took away 1/3 of his goals that season, there's no way he'd have got that move. So identifying these details I feel are important. Same again, here he goes. What could happen next? He could play in behind. I'm going to work hard. I can't go in between. I've got to go outside. I'm going to get outside. I'm going to get my body so I can see ball and goal. And to be fair, if you can finish like that, you're going to be a good player. And then finally, that calmness of the finish. So same again, we're watching Lacazette in there in his Lyon days. He's anticipated. He's adjusted his body. He's on the T position. He's in between defenders. He holds that position, doesn't move from the offside line, finishes calmly and coolly. Again, a player that you take those goals away from his Lyon move, we're talking taking away in between 30 and 50% of his goals. There at the top of the screen, anticipate, T position, finish calmly. And then on about sharing learning is that what tends to happen then, and what we challenge the players to do, was if you're going to get really good at this, then our defenders are going to have to get really good at stopping you doing it. Because if they can't, you're going to have an easy ride in training. And this is where the sharing come into it. I talked about heaven and hell, about you communicate with your opponent in training, not in a match. What am I doing that is giving you a problem? How are you going to stop me doing this? Right, if you do that, what can I still do to give you a problem? And you'll see now the examples of Chiellini, Chiellini, this example, we're going to watch, he'll come into shot in a second. There we go, number 3. And the same role for defender. Anticipate, looks like the ball could go behind, adjust my body position, see ball and goal. Don't let that striker get the T position. You make sure he's teeing off on the rough. There's some separation. If he's up on the offside line now, you've got a problem. And then once you're in control of the situation, stay calm and be cool, make the right decision. Virgil van Dijk in this example. High line, anticipate. Pressure on the ball, couldn't go in behind. I'm going to hold a high line. Looks like it could go in behind now. No pressure on the ball. Create some separation. Don't let this guy get the T position. Make sure I can see the ball. Make sure I can see the goal. Don't let him get the T position. Once you're there in a race, stay calm, defend it coolly. And I think by creating that environment then, you start to add up the sum of the parts. Because if your number 9 is improving your defender, your number 9 starts to, again, go back to Vardy, knock on Mahrez's door and say, hey, you know, that's the type of pass I want. So you get your head up and get in there. And you get Vardy sharing his what happens next clips with Mahrez. What a good player you could be, Riyad, if you're picking those passes. And then suddenly then the individual concept becomes a team, a unit, a group concept within obviously some clear playing principles. And I'm really conscious of time. The last example I'll give is a practical example. So this is a player who I'm not going to claim at all I was the key contributor. We had an amazing group of staff, and she herself is one of the most, talk about being maxing out. You won't get better than this lady. Just an absolute warrior in terms of being the best version of herself every single day. So 2014, age 28, 0 England caps. Brought into World Cup squad, brought into the team, made 4 appearances, got 1 goal. Vision wasn't enough. You know, that her vision was, no, I want to be the best in the world. 2 years later, 4 appearances in the European Championships, 5 goals, takes on the Golden Boot. And the detail this player went through was actually very similar. I wanted to use an example of a similar profile in there. If we go back to those key phrases, T position, anticipate, what could happen next, T position, and then finishing calmly. Jodie scored 5 goals in this tournament. I'm going to show you 4 of which. So she'll be the number 9 now. Won't quite see her in shot, but as the ball's played, I guarantee she was on the offside line. You can see she's the only player in that shot other than one of ours facing the opponent's goal. Her body shape was spot on. She's assumed, what's the best thing that could happen here? Well, the best thing that can happen here is either she leaves it, which she does, or she has a touch, I'll readjust and get my T position again. And once I'm in, I'm going to finish as early as possible, but as late as needed and calmly. That was goal 1 in the tournament. I've missed out goal 2. Goal 3 in the tournament, we'll see again. As the ball goes, bang. Anticipate. What's the best thing that can happen here? We're watching Question of Sport and you're going to score a goal at the end of this. What's going to happen next? Well, I'm hoping she's going to flick that on and behind. I've adjusted my body position. I can see ball and goal. I'm going to make sure when she touches it, I am bang on that offside line. I am on that tee position. I don't want to tee off from here. I don't want to tee off offside. I'll get a 3-stroke penalty. And as the header, as the header comes in, we want to be banging that offside line. There. And once you get in, early as possible, late as needed, but always calmly and coolly. Last group game of the tournament. So he receives, defending a throw-in. There she is at centre-forward position. Our ball. Let's get back into Question of Sport mode. What can happen next? What's the best thing that can happen for me to get me running in behind? Well, luckily enough that she'd started to influence other players. Where can I get to put this player in behind? I'll learn this in a second. Okay, here we go. There. That's where I want to be. I'm going to start anticipating. If that ball goes in there, I want to get on the end of it. Anton Griezmann, in what happened next, found a way to get that ball from there to there. You find a way because she's anticipated it. She's adjusted her body shape. She's going to make sure she's on that tee position by the time you do that. And I'm going to finish calmly and coolly. And then last example was this is where we fitted it into a team sheet. So this was Jodie's game plan. I'm not giving any secrets away here for our game against France. On the left-hand side, her team objective. This is what you need to do for the team. In defence, you set the tone, set a trap. I'll talk about in a second. In attack, unfortunately for number 9, when you're playing France, you've got to make bad balls good balls. Doesn't sound pretty, but that's part of the job. But ultimately, yeah, you'll do that for the team. But within this heart, this is your identity. This is how you bring yourself on the game. This might be enough to get us a win. You bring that big time, we'll get over the line. And then we'll talk about the detail. So the players I work with now will analyse their opponent. We'll look at their strengths and weaknesses. And we'll talk about what type of situations can you probably anticipate that might happen next in this particular game against these particular opponents. So against France, we knew that when the ball goes beyond you, they're going to only leave. They attack with a 2-8. So they can only leave 2 back. So once that ball goes beyond you, you start to anticipate a counter-attack situation. Be ready for the best, what happens next. We know that the full-backs both bomb on, and we know they've lost a centre-half who's their key player. So let's try and target this one and get in behind her down the right channel. And there's a goalkeeper. When you go in, remember, she doesn't set. So if earlier you can hit it, the better chance you've got scoring. And then talking about setting the trap, this was the plan, is that set a wide pressing trap, we called it. So, it's forced the ball into a wide area. So she's done her bit. She's set the tone. She pressed in there. And now she's just setting the trap. She's ushering them, giving us a signal. We only want to defend half the pitch. We'll defend this half. We'll get a lot of numbers over there. And this part of the pitch will be very man orientated. Marking, marking, marking. Jodie coming to shot. We'll try and regain the ball in this area. Now you start thinking what could happen next. Because if we win that, you've got to be off. Adjust your body position and make sure you are on that tee position at the moment they can release it. Finish calmly and coolly. Goalie doesn't set well, hitting early. And I think going back to one of the questions you guys asked about, have I ever questioned the philosophy? Yes. But I'm also a big believer that when you, and I've spent a lot of my life doing this, when you identify top sports people, not just footballers, you'll tend to see that when they're at their best, they're only doing a few things, but they're doing those things very, very well. And they lead to the massive outcomes. And like I said at the end, so I'm more than happy to take some questions now. And I've put some emails and contacts, and me being here, I'm absolutely open to contact people reaching out. I'll always get back to you, however long that might take. I promise I'll get back to you. And I'd encourage you, if you've got any questions or thoughts or criticisms or support for what I've suggested or experience you've had, that things you've done that were different and worked, I'd love to hear them.
Got a couple questions that have been sent in. One of them is talking about motivation at the youth level, and how can you motivate a player that's only extrinsically motivated? And we're talking around like U11 kind of age group, because I'm guessing with the goal tree, it's more like internal, intrinsic motivation, setting those things. So I guess how can you then affect a young player like that that's externally motivated?
I mean, it is more of a challenge, but I'd probably go back to slide one, connection. Work out who the player is, who the person is, and ultimately what is their vision. And my coaching experience takes me back to driving around in my Vauxhall Corsa with full of balls, bibs and cones from session to session. And I used to always remember my Tuesday was university 8 till 10. I would then coach a lunchtime group who was a school year 6. I then go and do a college team, and I then go and do what is called an after school club in a leisure centre, and then I go and work at what was a centre of excellence in the day. And every one of those players had completely different motivations. Lucky enough at England, the majority of the players, and even now in the professional game, their vision is, I want to do something special. I want to get to the Premier League. But that player, an example, their vision might be that I just want to have fun. I just want to be with my mates. And I think if you can understand that, you can find a way to tweak your session that creates the environment they need to get what they need out of the session without compromising the group as a whole. Yeah,
brilliant. Do you use a goal tree yourself with different targets and maybe things at a club or in different positions you've been in?
Yeah, I have done for a long time now. I've done probably round about since 2014, probably when I first got introduced. And this is not my own idea or philosophy. Everything I've shared with you today, I've stolen. Hence why I'm so keen for you to send some things to me. But yeah, I do. I've done it for a long time. Like I think I mentioned it, I'm very clear that my vision is I want to make my family proud. I want to give us a life that we can enjoy. And that's not financial. That's creating an environment where I can spend a lot of time with them, that I can have a good balance between work and my family. And then, underneath that, season by season, month by month, what's my USP? What's my identity? How am I getting better at that? And check and challenge myself. So, for example, always one of my challenges is the strength of my connections. So at the end of every month, I'll always look and say, right, well, there's my list of players I'm working with. Where am I on the connection radar? Have I gone down? Have I gone up? If I've gone down, why? If I've gone up, how? How can I get higher? And maybe I might need to speak to a few of these players because, do you know what? I haven't given them enough time. Look at that. That player this month, I've only had 4 conversations with, whereas that one, I've spoken to him every day. So I think, it just, again, gives me a reality check of why I'm doing it. And more importantly, just make sure I understand what are my blockers, what are the things that I know when I do them, I'm not at my best, and what are the things I know that when I do them more of, I feel I'm at my best.
Brilliant. And then would you use some like the other staff around you to basically help you, I guess, fact check that to make sure that you've reached those targets? Kind of have someone that you would sit and discuss. Do you think I have a tick on this part, or do you think it's an hour and I need to, push it on a month or improve?
No, I think that's critical. And I think the best people to give feedback are your family and your players. And going back to that vulnerability point is that I think as a coach, one of the bravest things you can do is stand in front of the team room and say, I got that one wrong. I thought this would happen. It didn't. I got that one wrong. And just trying to create that open that door for other people to say the same thing. You know, Mark, this didn't like that session this morning. You know, not well, bad luck. You know, next time just shut up and get on with it. Well, that ain't going to open any vulnerability, and the next time the feedback will be great session. I think I've always said to players, I'd far rather you tell me something to my face than behind my back. So definitely, you know, finding ways to get feedback. You know, you don't know what you don't know. And I think that's always been a mantra I've got in my head all the time. And the only way you can find out what you don't know is by asking questions. And if I want to encourage the players to have a learning mindset and ask questions, then I've got no choice but to role model that.
Brilliant.
Just sticking with the same theme of that relationship between the player and coach, James has asked, what happens if a player doesn't buy in?
Great point. And I think the goal trees I've shown would be an example of players who over time have bought in. But there's players I work with now, whether they're at the club or outside of externally, who their goal tree, we might have just cracked the vision. We might have just got to the point where, right, we made some progress. We've got a vision. And I think everyone's different. You know, some people will learn on paper. Some people will learn through a conversation. But it's about building blocks. And the ultimate question is, am I better today than I was yesterday? And if you're lucky enough to work with players who are significantly better every day because of their mindset and their attitude, then you're very lucky and you might have done something fantastic to get to that point. But how can you get those players to be a little bit better every day? Chip away at the process. But I think if you can get somewhere near a vision, somewhere near an identity, I think you'd be surprised actually by reinforcement, positive reinforcement, constant support, showing some vulnerability, building that connection and belief. You know, how you can probably extend it over time. But yeah, there's no pill, is there? I wish there was. I wish you could take a pill and there was a shortcut to developing good players and becoming a good coach. But I've certainly learned that becoming a good coach is, the more I learn, the more I understand I don't know. And I think that's the challenge, is that how can you be patient enough to stay consistent and keep working at it to get all your players on the path that gets them better every day.
Brilliant.
I think that's key, isn't it? That patience, because it can be so easy to become somewhat frustrated when you've seen using similar methods, not the exact, with potential teammates, and then obviously them having a slightly bigger spurt in their development. So no, that's great.
Right. And I think also I've always tried in the environments I've worked to utilise and harness the player power, and in a positive way. So, you know, use the players to help the ones who aren't falling into line with the vision, who aren't buying in as much. Get them to share their experiences. And in my experience, you'd be amazed when a player goes, hold on a minute, I was playing ahead of him last week. Last year, I was another level to that player. You know, I want a bit of what they're doing. And I think, again, chipping away, working out through your good connection with the person, how can you get them to where they want to be is the key.
Brilliant. Another question here from Greg. You talked about, you know, creating an environment that doesn't have too much pressure, I guess, on the individual. How would you, I guess, add that into an environment at the elite level when, I mean, it really is pressured in terms of, you know, trying to get points, trying to win games and things like that?
Yeah,
how do you find the balance?
I think that in my experience of pressurized environment, the more the pressure, the more you've got to do to take away the pressure. So in a strange way, I felt it works the way around. In situations where there wasn't external pressure or internal pressure, I found myself as a coach trying to create pressure. Going back to that, this is the time to build competence. Right, do you know what? We've got an easy schedule of games coming up here. So we're going to really work hard on the training ground. This is a learning month. You know, we're going to get fitter. We're going to work for longer. We're going to work on your technique more. We're going to work on your mindset more. And then at the times when the pressure's high, I've always felt then you've got to earn your money to take the pressure off, to focus on competence. How am I building players' confidence in that period, that they feel they can play with no fear of failure? Because ultimately, pressure, yes, with certain people it helps, and it gives intensity, but it can certainly add a fear of failure, which is never great for elite performance in my experience.
Brilliant. Excellent questions from everyone, and some really good answers there. Thank you for that. I think we'll wrap it up there. Lots and lots of information, I think, to process. So Mark, thank you for joining us this evening, and providing, these great slides, great information for everyone. Hope everyone can take some stuff away. Again, folks, as Mark said, email and Twitter there on the screen. Reach out, okay? If you have further questions, feel free. Thanks for joining us. Again, keep an eye out on Twitter and in your inboxes for our next webinars coming up. Again, thank you so much for joining us tonight, Mark. We really appreciate it.
Pleasure, and thanks everyone. Stay safe and try your best to enjoy what's a challenging time at the moment.
Brilliant.
Very much more. Appreciate it.
Pleasure, gents.